Welcome. Thanks for being here. I put 2 perfumes on this morning. Same name, same house, one on each wrist. Both are Taboo by Dana. And the one on my left is older than most of you watching. Look at this bottle. It's a tall black cone with gold band at the foot. It's the kind of bottle a woman kept out on the dressing table to intimidate the other bottles. And the one on my right, you can actually buy this afternoon at the drugstore for about the price of a sandwich. So my left wrist smells like a woman came into the room just before I did and hasn't entirely left. There's a dark spiced amber in it. There's patchouli and something, frankly, pretty animal underneath, sitting on a bitter, mossy floor. And you're right, it's not entirely polite. The right wrist smells nice enough. I mean, it smells like the idea of the left wrist described over the phone by someone in a hurry, like it's been to finishing school and everything interesting about it has been asked to leave. The animal is gone and the moss is barely a rumor. The woman who walked into the room has been replaced by a scented card advertising her. And so these 2 bottles aren't different because the old one turned. I'll show you later why that isn't what's happening. They're different because somewhere between the first bottle and the second, we changed the rules of what a perfume's allowed to be. We pulled the body out of it. We made it cheap enough for everyone and legal enough for everywhere until almost everything smelled like almost everything else. And a lot of people have decided they want the left wrist back. They're paying a fortune for it in unlabeled vials bought from strangers on the internet. And you can call it nostalgia if you like, but I think it runs stranger and sadder than that. So 3 things today. One is the molecule that flattened the whole industry, and I'll do the chemistry properly because the chemistry is the story everyone skips. Another is the law that killed 100 years of great perfume, while the rest of us argued about celebrity flankers. And the last one is what keeps me up at night. Why so many sane people are now buying the body back in unmarked vials, and whether they've found the last honest thing in the room or talked themselves into a very expensive corner. Stay with me. At some point in the last 10 years, everybody started smelling the same. You already know this in your body, even if you've never said it out loud. You've stood in the lift and caught it. Somebody hugs you hello, and there it is again. A nose full of something warm and pleasant that you can't name and don't need to because you've smelled it 40 times this week already, and it's on the teenager and it's on your CFO. It's the smell of now. And the odd part is that now doesn't smell like a person. It smells like a very nice hotel lobby that has been told to smell like nothing in particular, expensively. There's one scent that people point at when they want to name this. Baccarat Rouge 540. You even know it. If you don't know it, you know it. It came out about a decade ago. Beautiful and new in a way almost nothing is. It's a glowing, sweet, woody saffron thing that hangs a foot off the skin. And then it got copied, and The copies had copies, and it turned up in candles and laundry aisles, and before long, in $30 bottles with name that read like Wi-Fi passwords. The most distinctive smell of the decade became the most generic smell of the decade, which is either a tragedy or a business plan, depending on where you're standing. So this isn't a story about knockoffs, though, because that's the easy version, and we've done the dupe episode already. A smell can be copied into oblivion in 18 months because underneath the branding there is a very small number of cheap, dependable molecules doing almost all the work. And one of them is doing more of the work than any single ingredient has ever done in the history of the art. So let me introduce you to it properly, not as a villain in a headline, but as a piece of chemistry with a real history. It solved a real problem, and it left the whole business flatter than it found it. The thing everybody calls Ambroxan is a brand name. It's like calling every vacuum cleaner a Hoover, except the confusion is doing real damage, so I'm going to fix it. The molecule is Ambroxide. Ambroxan is what one maker calls it. Another sells the identical thing as Ambrox, another Acetylox, another, grown rather than cooked, as Ambrofix. One molecule and half a dozen jackets, each with its own price tag and its own marketing story. When someone online says a fragrance is just Ambroxan, what they mean is that it belongs to a whole family of clean, woody materials, and they've reached for the one name they know. So here's where it gets unfair to our molecule. A lot of the loud, scratchy, headache-inducing scents people put on Ambroxan aren't Ambroxide at all. They're rougher cousins, the amberwoods, with names like norolimbinol and Ambroxanide, which sound like industrial solvents and are not far off. They can strip paint at 40 paces. But if we're going to put a material on trial, we owe it to the material to charge it with its own crimes and not its relatives. So, what is Ambroxide actually? Well, it's one smell taken out of the most romantic ingredient in the history of perfume, which is ambergris. Ambergris is the stuff that occasionally washes up on a beach and turns a dog walker into a millionaire. It begins as something a sperm whale urgently needs to be rid of, and it spends years at sea in the salt and the sun and turns into a warm mineral smell, faintly animal, that goes on forever and that perfumers have adored for 200 years, which tells you everything you need to know about perfumers. It's off the table now. For legal and ethical reasons. In the United States, you can't trade in it because the animal it comes from is protected. But here's the part that almost every explainer gets wrong. Ambroxide isn't synthetic ambergris. Real ambergris is a cord, a huge, blurred, mineral animal accord with dozens of facets. Ambroxide is one note, lifted out of that cord, cleaned up, and mass-produced. It keeps the warm, skin-like glow of ambergris and throws out the salt and the animal strangeness, which is exactly the point and exactly the problem. We've known how to make it for a surprisingly long time. Two chemists at Firmenich in Geneva synthesized it in 1950 out of sclarol, which you pull from clary sage. It's a garden weed that lets you conjure the ghost of a whale. Now, if that isn't the whole 20th century in a sentence, I don't know what is. So for decades, it sat in the perfumer's cabinet as one option among hundreds. A seasoning. The molecule didn't change, but the economics did. So did the law. And a few bottles came along to show everyone what it could do once you stopped being shy about it. So how to understand it. Ambroxide is auto-tune. Auto-tune nudges every note a voice sings onto the exact correct pitch. On a real singer with a light hand, it's invisible. And it's a gift. It saves the afternoon, and nobody sane is against it existing. But make it cheap enough that every producer owns it, and something happens that nobody voted for. Every voice lands on the same corrected note. That little human wobble disappears, so does the crack. And the reach at the end of a phrase where you can hear a person actually trying, well, you get a decade of records that are technically perfect and increasingly impossible to tell apart. The singer stops being a person and becomes a very clean delivery system for a melody. And so this is what Ambroxide is doing to perfume. And it did it faster than auto-tune ever managed with music. Drop a good dose into any formula and you get an instant lift. It throws itself off the skin and lasts all day, which is the one thing a customer will reliably ask for, right after they've asked for something that smells unique. The industry hears the first request and quietly loses the second. It reads clean and expensive. The cost is a rounding error next to real sandalwood. It never has an off day, and it tests beautifully with a focus group in a mall in 3 different countries. So the industry did the rational thing, which is usually how you get a catastrophe. Everyone reached for the same corrective in the same few years, under the same cost pressure, and the whole art form snapped into one clean note. You can watch it happen through 4 bottles. Around 2008, a perfumer put Ambroxide in a bottle almost by itself and sold it as a dare. Molecule 02, a glowing nothing that smelled of your own skin having a better day. It sold beautifully because it turns out we will pay a great deal to smell faintly of ourselves. A couple of years on, another house pulled the same trick with the very same molecule, called it, with a completely straight face, not a perfume. They charged perfume money for it, and we said, thank you. Then, in 2015, the biggest men's launch of the era leaned hard on this family. The one half the men you know have worn at some point. And around the same time came that luminous thing from the top of the show, the one that spawned 1,000 copies. 4 bottles, less than a decade, and the center of gravity of the whole business slid on to one warm, reliable note. And after that, the copies weren't copying a perfume. They were copying a setting. They'd all found the same plugin. So how far did it go? One French perfume magazine got sick enough of this stuff to count and found this family of materials crammed into 1 out of every 2 bottles that crossed their desk. Half of everything new, the same note, over and over, wearing different labels. So let me prove it on my own shelf. I'd rather not make you take a magazine's word for it. So this bottle, which is Essential Parfum Bois Impérial by Quentin Biche, this bottle costs about $90. And it opens, let me spray it on my skin, Bois Impérial. Where are we going to spray you? I think over here. So it opens green and peppery for a minute. And then it settles into a smooth, glowing dry wood that sits close to the skin and reads to anyone who leans in as money. Strangers ask what it is. The whole internet files it next to bottles that cost 3 times as much. The reason is a clean amber called Ambrofix. It's grown in a vat. It holds the scent up and throws it off your wrist, or in my case, my arm, all day. So this one, okay, that's Bois Impérial. This one is Side Effect by Initio, and it costs $300. Boozy. Let me spray it on my skin now. Where shall we spray you? All right. Let's spray you over here. It's boozy. It's rum and sweet tobacco up top with a syrupy cherry edge, and it fills the room and lasts until the next morning. Under the booze, the same dry amber does the actual work. Different story on the label, same engine in the tank. Now, here is one you have smelled 1,000 times without ever buying it, perhaps. Santal 33 by Labo. Let me spray it on skin. Now, where shall I spray you? On my hand, I think. Whew. This is the smell of every coffee shop and cool boutique for a decade. It's also the smell of every person on the train who looked cooler than you. It's sold as sandalwood. There's almost no sandalwood in it. What gives it that dry, blurred glow that makes the whole carriage turn around is ISO E Super, a transparent woody molecule that costs pennies and vanishes inside your own nose while everyone near you keeps catching it. I could keep going. The glowing sweet thing from the top of the show has a twin on the shelf that costs 1/3 as much and fools people daily, built from the same saffron and the same amber. Over here is a Comme des Garçons called Wonderwood. And Wonderwood, where are we going to spray you? Oh goodness, Wonderwood, let me see. I think I haven't this hand. Wonderwood is a wall of synthetic timber that no tree ever grew. And I love it. And that is exactly the point. Now, the joke that makes the whole thing honest. 2 bottles here refuse to hide any of it. One is called Molecule 01. It's nothing but that ISO-E Super on purpose. No story, no bottle full of flowers, and it pulls more compliments than perfumes 40 times as complicated. The other, from a house called Nomenclature, names every single perfume after the one molecule inside it. They print the chemistry on the box and they charge you for the honesty. So half the industry hides the molecule behind a saffron story like Baccarat Rouge, and a couple of clever houses sell you the identical molecule with the lights on. $90 or $300, niche or designer, keep shaking hands with the same few materials in different coats. And that isn't a coincidence. It's the plug-in. One honest footnote, because we don't cheat here. For the secret bottles, those molecule names are the biggest guess of very obsessive people smelling backwards, not something the houses will confirm. The 2 that printed on the box are the only ones I can promise you. You don't need the formula to catch the family resemblance, though. Your nose has been telling you for years. Now, one strange wrinkle before we leave the chemistry. A lot of people can barely smell ambroxide at all. There's a receptor in your nose, a common variation in the gene that builds it, and if you carry that variation, the molecule reads as faint or close to gone. How many people carry it comes down to where their ancestors came from, and in some populations, it's almost nobody. In others, it's close to half. So the single most widely worn material of our era is a smell you might catch at full strength or barely register, depending on your bloodline. And somewhere out there is a man on his 5th bottle of a signature scent he's never once smelled. Across parts of East Asia, something like half the population is wearing the signature note of the decade and can hardly detect it. We reached for the molecule that smells like almost nothing, and for an awful lot of people, we succeeded completely. Now the fair part, because the cheap shot is sitting right there and I don't want it. The molecule is, by most measures, people actually care about, good news. Some of it is grown now, brewed out of sugarcane by engineered microbes instead of dug out of the ground, which spares the whale and skips some filthy chemistry. It's kind to the allergic, it lets a small maker with no budget put something luminous on the market and actually compete. A 22-year-old on their first paycheck can smell expensive, and I refuse to be the woman standing between a broke 22-year-old and smelling like money. So the molecule isn't on trial. Molecules don't have intentions, and the wearer isn't on trial either. If you love your warm, glowing thing, wear it in good health. What is on trial is the arrangement, the brief that wants test well and last all day, and the off-the-shelf base you buy by the drum, so nobody builds a heart from scratch anymore. And a market that pays for the 40th flanker while it starves the one new idea. Nobody chose the smell of the mean on purpose. We each made a sensible small decision over 1,000 times over and woke up in a world where the lift is on every wrist and the person underneath it is nowhere to be found. And that's one half of the story. The other half is that a lot of what used to make perfume smell like a body was made against the rules with the best of intentions while nobody was watching. So go back to my left wrist. That bitter, damp, mossy thing sitting under the amber is oakmoss. It's a lichen that grows on a tree bank, and for most of the 20th century, it held up a whole family of perfume called chypre, the great, bitter, mossy things that smelled like adults. Mitsuku is the one everyone names, bruised peach laid over cold bitter moss, and old taboo leaned on it too, and the law came for it. Now, the right wrist barely has it, and here's why. And the why is no conspiracy, which somehow makes it worse. Oakmoss carries a couple of compounds a certain number of people are allergic to. Not most people. A real minority with real rashes. There's a body in this business called IFRA that writes the safety standards for what goes into perfume and at what level. And what makes this more interesting than the government-ruined perfume is that IFRA is the industry. It's the perfume business writing the rules for the perfume business. The fox wrote the hen house safety code and signed it on behalf of the hens. Over about 30 years, in a run of small steps, it strangled oakmoss. And the first restriction came in 1988. In 2008, a tighter standard singled out the two allergy-causing molecules inside oakmoss, atronol and chloroatronol, and pushed them down toward trace levels. Then the European Union did what regulators do and turned an industry guideline into law. It adopted the ban in 2017, and from the summer of 2019, you could no longer put a product carrying more than a trace of either onto the European market. The loud version of this is wrong in a way that matters. Oakmoss isn't banned. 2 of its molecules are outlawed in Europe, but the moss itself is only restricted, and most of that restriction is voluntary. IFRA is an industry club. It's not a government. Any house that wants mainstream shelves or a clean sale into Europe follows the club rules and reformulates the damp stone down to a whisper. That whisper is the right wrist. But a stubborn handful of independent makers never joined the club, and they still build real, full-strength oak moss sheepers, mostly in America, for people who know how to look. So the great mossy thing isn't gone from the world. It's gone from the shelf you actually walked past, and it went underground, which, as it happens, is exactly where the rest of this episode is going. So the moss wasn't the only casualty. The same decades took out the nitro musks that gave old perfumes their warm, dirty hum, along with the real animal materials, the ones with the frankly indecent names, civet and castoreum, that made a vintage base smell warm-blooded. Those are effectively out too, swapped for synthetics that behave and don't smell of anything alive. Put it together. The molecule gave every perfume the same clean lift. The Lord took away oak moss. It took the dirty musks and the animal notes too, and all the difficult things that used to give a perfume its shadows. And what's left is a bright top, with a plug pulled on everything dark and human underneath. The right wrist. Pleasant. Legal. Bodiless. So the politics here are thornier than the loud version admits, and there's no clean villain in it. On one side, this is a safety win. A real minority got protected from real reactions, and anyone who waves that away because they miss their mossy sheepra is saying their own comfort outranks somebody else's skin, which is a position, but an ugly one. On the other side, look at who paid. The rule protected a small number of allergic people, and the bull landed on the art. 100 years of great perfume went unviable at full strength, and nobody stood on a stage to announce it. It died in a subcommittee written up in the flat language of risk. And notice who could absorb that. The giant houses with the labs and the chemists on staff, the ones who paid hardest were the small makers who can't afford a lab. Safety rules written by the industry that the biggest players are the best equipped to survive have a quiet way of clearing out the competition. And no, I'm not saying that was the plan. I'm saying notice who was still standing once the room emptied. There's a shadow on the other side too. Some of what we're mourning was cruel. Real civet came out of frightened animals in cages, so part of what you go misty over was taken from something that suffered for it. And a good chunk of these restrictions weren't nanny state overreach at all. They were the industry growing a conscience, or at least a liability department, and the rest was less cruelty in the bottle. Hold that alongside the loss. Both hands. So, a cheap, brilliant molecule pouring in from one side, well-meaning rules stripping the body out from the other, into that empty, flattened, legal, pleasant room. And then the industry did one more thing. It turned on the taps. Here's a number that should stop you. Count the new fragrances logged in a year in the early 1980s and you get a little over 200. Count them in 2023 and you get more than 7,000. More new perfumes launch in the time it takes you to finish one bottle than a person could smell in a lifetime with a clear head. And a huge share of them aren't new ideas. They're flankers, the trade word for a variation of a hit, a sport or an intense or an elixir, bolted onto a name that already sold. There are around 6 versions of that big men's scent we talked about. Of one single woman's launch, there are more than 30. The original is down there somewhere, buried under its own children. Somebody measured the creativity draining out of all of this. An independent perfume writer called Brian Buchanan went through a huge fragrance database and tracked how much real change was happening across the whole business year to year. Then he watched it fall off a cliff after 2020, from about 16 meaningful moves a year down to 10, a third of the movement gone, which matches what your own nose keeps telling you. More bottles than ever, less inside them, a flood that is somehow also a drought. Think about what a flood does to value. When a thing is rare, having it means something. When it's everywhere, having it means nothing, however lovely the thing happens to be. The industry spent 30 years making perfume cheaper and more available, which sounds like pure progress, and in the process it destroyed the one thing a fragrance was secretly for, which was to make you distinct. Your signature scent got signed away by 4 million other people this year. The flood didn't only make everything smell alike, it made smelling like anything in particular impossible to buy new. So the people who need to be somewhere the crowd is not went looking for the exit. For about 20 years, the exit was called niche. Small houses with odd ideas, expensive and hard to find. The smell of not shopping where everyone shops. Knowing the niche name signaled that you'd gone deeper than the department store, and for a while it worked beautifully. Then the exit got bought. The big luxury conglomerates, the ones that own the handbags and the champagne, watched niche grow while everything else stalled. And they did what capital does to a thing that works. The cult New York house with the apothecary labels became part of a beauty giant, and the school and the cool Scandinavian one went to a Spanish luxury group, and the old heritage cult name went to the company that owns the Italian fashion houses. The moment the cult thing is stacked in the duty-free, the not everyone has this evaporates. You can't sell exclusivity at the airport. The exit filled up with the exact crowd you were trying to leave. So where do you run then, once the mall is flooded and niche is the mall, and the copies have copies, and the law won't let anyone make the deep, old, strange stuff at full strength? Well, you run backwards into time. The past is the one supply the industry can't reprint. So here's the object for the rest of the show, not the grand bottle on the collector's shelf. This, the decant. The decant is a few milliliters of a discontinued perfume drawn out of somebody's precious old bottle and sent to you in a plain vial. No box, no barcode, often no label beyond a strip of tape with a name and a year in biro, and you find them the way you find things not quite meant to be sold. Forums, marketplace groups, a stranger with a username and a reputation who splits a rare bottle among 6 other strangers who trust him because the last person did. Tell me what that reminds you of. Something officially discontinued, effectively unmakeable under the rules. It moves hand to hand in unmarked containers. Reputation vouchers for it, not a receipt. That's how banned books used to move. This is samizdat, The great smells of the last century have turned into contraband literature because the legal in-store version of the scent has been ironed into something nobody who's tasted the real thing can love. There's also a colder reading, and I owe you both. The vintage bottle is money now, hard money. When the currency you spend every day is being debased, people flee into whatever holds its value, and in perfume, that thing is the sealed old bottle, because the mint has stopped printing it. A desirable sealed bottle from before the rules changed runs anywhere from a few hundred to a couple of thousand, and it swings wildly with the name and the condition. The rare grand ones clear tens of thousands, sometimes for the flacon more than the juice. A single Lalique bottle from 1912 went for $84,000 at auction a few years back. That was for the glass. The perfume had evaporated decades earlier, and so, apparently, had the buyer's sense of proportion. The wider luxury resale world this sits inside is measured in the tens of billions. So the collector's doing two contradictory things in one gesture. She's rescuing something beautiful and human from a flood of sameness. She's also holding a position in an asset, a romantic and a hedge fund. Same little vial. Keep that in your pocket because it's going to spoil the happy ending I can feel both of us wanting. Nobody spends 4 figures on a stranger's old perfume for an economics lecture, though. They do it because of what the flood and the rules did to it together. We took the body out, and now we're paying anything you ask to get it back. That's what all of it added up to. For 40 years, we deodorized perfume. We swapped the note that smelled like a warm neck for the one that smells like a clean one, and built a scent you could wear to a funeral or a first date without anyone flinching. And in making it safe for every room, we made it a stranger to the only surface it ever lived on, which is a body. Modern perfume, at its most typical, smells like a beautifully scented candle burning in a room where nobody is home. The great vintage perfume smelled like somebody was home. They had sweet and skin in them and something faintly indecent under the flowers, a warmth that landed unmistakably as another person, and they were allowed to be a bit too much. They were allowed to announce that a woman had a body and meant to use it back in a decade that let her say so. And that's what my left wrist has, that my right wrist lost. Not quality exactly. A pulse. Now watch what the industry confesses by accident. The hottest thing in fragrance right now, the trend every brand is chasing, is the skin scent, the your skin but better, the no perfume perfume, which is of course a perfume sold at perfume prices. Soft, clean masks that melt into you and make people lean in and murmur that you smell incredible without being able to say what you're wearing. Intimacy in a bottle. The smell of a body. You see it, don't you? After 40 years of scrubbing the body out of perfume, the most wanted thing on the market is perfume pretending to be a body. We removed the human and now we're selling the ghost of it back at a premium. And the skin scent is a clean, synthetic imitation of intimacy, a body sketched from memory by someone who was told about bodies and instructed to keep it tasteful. So the vintage bottle isn't an imitation. It carries the real animal warmth because that warmth came out of actual animals, back before we knew better or cared to. So when a young collector pays £200 for a decant of something discontinued and says, it smells like a real person, that's not romance. It's accuracy. They found in an unlabeled vial from a stranger the exact thing the whole modern market is spending fortunes to fake. I can show you the body I mean. I own it in 3 bottles, and nobody makes these like this anymore. So the first bottle is, put that there, Vintage Opium. This is 1977. Now, I don't know where you're, opium. I think we're going to have to do you here. It opens like a slap of clove and pepper with something almost medicinal behind it. And then it burns down slowly into warm resin and smoke. And underneath all of it, there's a leathery animal note that reads unmistakably as a warm neck. And a woman wore this as armor. It caused a scandal on the name alone. Spray the version on the shelf today, and you get a sweeter, cleaner cousin with the smoke turned down and the animal taken out. This is Fiji. This is Guy Laroche, 1966. And don't let the tropical name fool you. It opens, and let me spray you on skin, Fiji. Again, up here. My goodness. Whew. It opens cool and bitter green, galbanum and cut hyacinth, and it's closer to a florist's back room than a beach. And then later, a spiced floral heart comes up, and it's carnation and jasmine over a soft mossy wood, and it settles right down onto the skin with a milky, faintly animal warmth underneath. Where opium walks into the room and announces itself, Fiji leans in and waits for you to notice. And it was sold on the promise that a woman is an island. The version on the shelf now kept the pretty green and lost the moss and the skin beneath it. So today, it's pleasant and forgettable. The last one abandons the body altogether. This is Vintage Van Vaart, Germaine Solier, 1947. No animal in it at all. What it has is the shock of raw green. Now, where am I going to put you? Goodness gracious, I truly am running out of skin. What did I put? I think I might have run out of skin altogether. Maybe here. Right there. This smells like bitter cut stems and cold sap of the garden rather than the woman. And it is not necessarily pretty, but that is the point. The modern version kept the green color and lost the bitterness. So today, it smells like a perfectly nice hand soap, which is the whole problem. So 3 bottles here, and not one of them agrees with the others about how loud a body is allowed to be. What they share is the one thing the reissue couldn't keep. And here's what surprised me. This isn't one generation's private ache. The people reaching back are as likely to be 70 as 22. Some of them are women my age and older buying back the exact bottle they wore in 85. That's nostalgia in its purest form, and good luck to them. But a huge share are half that age, reaching for a decade they were never alive to lose. And over half of you watching are under 45. When someone that young tracks down an 80s bottle, they aren't reaching into their own past. There's no memory in there to be nostalgic for. They're reaching for something they never had. And that's the part I find moving. And it's why the word nostalgia doesn't stretch far enough. Nostalgia wants your own past back, and some of these buyers want exactly that. But the rest are chasing a past that was never theirs to begin with. Why don't we call the whole thing inheritance instead? People who grew up inside the flood, inside scent that smells like nobody, went looking for proof that a person could once smell like a person and found it in objects older than they are. Not remember when, more like, so it was real before me. Underneath, across every age in that audience, the move is one move. You reach back past the flattening. You take something a stranger made, sometimes before you were born, and you carry it forward on your own warm skin, which is about the most human thing I can think of to do with a dead woman's perfume. Both wrists, both hands, and this one is going to run out. Every vial of the real thing is finite, every sealed bottle, one broken seal away from gone. And when the last of it has evaporated off the last collector's wrist, there'll be no more. The recipe is against the rules now, and the world that made it isn't coming back. The one will be here forever, clean and legal, and just a little bit dead. It's at the drugstore tonight, and it'll still be there long after the real bottle is gone dry. The smell of the mean. I won't tell you which wrist to want. I know which one I reach for, and I've just spent time explaining why my reasons are less pure than I pretend. But one thing sits under the chemistry and the money in a world that got very good at making more of everything. The only luxury left was the thing you couldn't make more of, and that thing turned out to be a smell a real person put in a bottle, before the rules, to be worn on a warm and living body, and we can't make it again. And that's the whole tragedy, and the whole value. One fact in two coats. And so the little vial in your palm holds the last of something. And spray it on once and stand close to someone, because that's the only thing it was ever for. All right, house lights up. But before you go, come, find me in the comments, because I've got a couple of questions and a poll for you. But first, the easy one. What's the smell of the mean where you live? What's the warm, clean thing you catch on 6 strangers a day? The one you couldn't escape if you tried? Name it, and let's see if half the internet turns out to be wearing the same bottle. And then, the one that actually costs you something. Tell me a scent you love and can't defend. The turned vintage you've decided to call character, or the drugstore thing you'd never own up to at a party. No judgment on this channel. I spent a whole act owning up to mine. And the poll, one word, 2 wrists, and you have to pick the one you'd actually wear. The reissue, clean and legal, or the old one, illegal and alive. Left or right? Please subscribe and like the video if the episode earned it, and go read the Substack for the full essays. See you soon.